Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a few months since I've worked on Herbie, but back at it today. Big thanks to Popularity Contest as well as Slade's VW Beetle. Both those guys went out of their way to put my information out on their website, so I really appreciate it, guys. There's going to be a link to their website in the description, so please everybody go and check them out. So in today's episode, we got the transmission mocked up with the new mounts, as well as the Eva Resto air ride. Got that all bolted in the car so everybody can see how it goes together. Hey everybody, here's where we're at today. So this is that heavy duty weld-on mount. I'm going to have to trim this down to get that to sit in there 2 inches above the factory height. I got to cut the sides way down, and I'll do some cutting and trimming, and then get this thing tacked on and bring you guys back on. Alright, here's where we're at. Got this sanded down where it's going to be welded. Had to beat the heck out of this nose cone mount because it was tweaked way over this way. I measured off of another pan just to make sure it was off by like shit 3/4 of an inch at least. Too much hammering on this poor thing. Anyways, here's what I got. Had to trim this way down for it to fit, but it'll basically fit up something like that, and that'll have to be tacked on, of course. Now I ended up buying off of Max at Eva Resto 2 of his transmission raise mounts. Let me bring you over to that real quick. Alright, here's how we're sitting with these. So he said that there might be complications running the 2-inch raise with the air ride kit, so I ended up buying a 2-inch and a 1-inch. I'd really like to have the trans tucked up, so that way my sump clears and a little bit less camber when I'm riding low. Anyhow, I was going to be running the black polyurethane like I usually do. I've had really good luck with those. I like them. They don't squeak because they're impregnated with graphite. But the issue that I ran into, this one I have not modified. Let's see here. These are also the CB Performance. Oh man, I can't remember the name of these gray ones. But anyhow, you can see how there's a gap down below, and it touches up top. So I messaged him. He said to use stock mounts. Well, I'm not using stock mounts in this, sorry pal. And the stock mounts, for those that know, it's got a little thin piece of sheet metal here, thin piece of sheet metal here, and then it's rubber in between. Well, that thin sheet metal, when you tighten these bolts up, that metal can bend down. I think that his jig is off. Personally, this isn't a bashing video by any means. All of his stuff looks great, but so far the first thing I tried fitting up did not fit. When you're spending money on something it's supposed to be bolt in, it should be able to bolt in. He said that these polyurethane mounts give him issues, so I tried spending some money getting these. I think they're called Rhino mounts. Spent some money on these, and even compared to a factory, let me put this one on the bottom. Compared to a factory mount, and this one's in pretty good shape. It's not the best, but it's fairly well. Let me get this centered up here. There you can see that curvature is off. Now putting this up against it, even though it's backwards, fits like it should. Now with the 2-inch raise, I ended up cutting with the cutoff wheel on the grinder. Trim down to about here, trim down, cut the gussets, bent those ears down. Let's see here. For holding it up. That's a lot better than it was. And I'm not going to just tighten up the bolts to get the gap to go away, because that will just screw up these mounts. Or the polyurethane, they were way off. I'll put in some pictures of how far they were off. But that's what I ended up having to do here. Wasn't terribly pleased having to do that, but that is life, right? So before I bolt the trans in, I'm going to put the camera down on the stand and get all the air ride parts together and start doing the install on all the bracketry. Got to put the spring plates on and bolt everything together and see how everything jives. Before I weld that, I might tack it. I might just bolt it to the front of the trans and see how close everything fits. I might have to move it left or right. I think that's a better way of doing it, having it bolted to the trans before I tack it into place. That way the shifter sits where it needs to be. So I'll start gathering parts and bring you guys back on in a minute. Alright, start off by moving these spring plate covers and putting the new spring plates on. I got some new grease from Energy Suspension for these black polyurethanes. I had the Atom Works, I believe, dropped spring plates in this before, and I went with the ones that Max put together that are splineless for the air ride. And before I had those spring plates in here, and I just took the torsion springs out and relied just on the airbags. So it's going to be pretty much the same, but I figure, you know what, I can use those spring plates on my wife's car. She just has stock spring plates right now, and it's lowered a little bit, but the drop plates sure do help out some. Some of this old grease and dirt off. So a lot of this stuff's pretty straightforward. Clean, re-grease, put together, bolt, unbolt, yada yada. But for those that want to watch, right on. For those that don't, go ahead and skip forward. So that fits there. Now these spring plates, I'm hoping these bushings are going to be right. I'm wanting to say for the Atom Works I had to buy 2 different sets because the center part was even going across and this is offset. So I might have to try to get lucky and dig through all my junk and find the other half of these spring plates, but this fits there. That kind of sucks. Hopefully I can find them. Pretty sure this is not going to fit on this, if memory serves correctly. Yep, no bueno. So I'll have to dig out those. Alright. I'll have to try to find them and then put you guys back on. Alright. Got lucky. Dug around for about a half hour. Found them. I'm not sure, I'm sure some of you have noticed the video kind of goes zoomed in, zoomed out. If I get closer to the camera, I'm not really sure. It's a new phone. It's a S23 Ultra or something like that. So I'm not sure if anybody else has a camera or a phone like this and knows how to get it to quit jumping back and forth. It's kind of annoying. But anyhow, let's get these things lubed up. Where the heck did I put that? There it is. So I'll film this side. The other side's pretty tight. Putting these spring plate bushings on. Pretty straightforward. Now if you do have your torsion springs, you should definitely have some caution. There's a tool that hooks up to this body mount and then hooks on the bottom of the spring plate so you can tighten it up, loosen this. And I usually go on the back side with the sledgehammer and beat this out till it gets past this stop. Then you lower it down. I've done it with floor jacks and chain. And I've also just loosened it up and whacked it on the back side with the back of an axe in my younger days. But that torsion spring, it sure does carry a lot of energy, so be careful, because you can get hurt pretty bad. So please keep that in mind when you're working on these old Volkswagens. I ended up making the mistake years ago running wheel bearing grease and polyurethane bushings on the front beam, and I noticed I had loose ball joints at the time, so I was pulling the control arms out to replace the ball joints, and the polyurethane just became like mush, because it's not meant to have that wheel bearing grease, whatever combo it is. I don't know if this is some kind of silicone, but yeah, definitely use the right grease and polyurethane. These are all 15 millimeter. Yeah, these bushings are really nice. They keep the spring plate from moving around, especially when you're doing some hard launches. You don't want your spring plate going back and forth. So it's been a little busy around my house. Had a few things going on. I ended up throwing some money down on a carport to replace my two gypsy tents, I call them out there. I have one carport that I bought at Costco. It's a 10 by 20, and that has been holding Noah's Bug and the Volkswagen, keeping them out of the rain. And the other carport that I have, it was a really old 10 by 20 from Costco back when they sold them with 2-inch pipe for the structure, and I ended up modifying it to fit both of my vans underneath it. And I extended the poles on the roof, so now it's like an 18 by 20, and I put a 40 by 40 tarp over it, and it's been doing good, but it's such a pain going out there every couple hours in the snow and sweeping the roof off so that way it doesn't collapse. So I ended up getting a, what size is that? 32 wide by 21 deep through a company, and they're going to be coming out here in a couple months and putting it up, so that's some pretty exciting business for me. And You have to do some work out there, get the ground all level and get everything torn apart and moved. But when I got the time, it's nice to come out here work on the bug. It's been too long since I've been driving it. Still got a lot of work to do, but we'll get there eventually. It's nice when you can kind of take your time working on things, so that way you don't rush and make poor decisions. Been there, done that too many times. These are torqued to good and tight. Don't have to reef on it too hard, not like I'm here with the 1/2-inch breaker bar, but pretty tight. I'd probably say these bolts probably sitting at about 50 foot-pounds or 40 foot-pounds ish. So there's that drop plate in, or drop spring plate. So I'll bolt the other side in. I'm not going to film that. I got too much junk over there in the way to put my camera up, but I'll put you guys back on when I start bolting in the rest of all this stuff. And then after that's bolted in, then time to bolt that transmission mount up and try fitting the transmission. Alright, so first thing on the instructions, it shows to mount the bags to these upper brackets. I really wanted to run these Slam specialty bags, but as you can see the mounting holes are different and the air fitting is closer to the center than it is to the edge on this airlift. My system goes up to 185 psi. These are only good for 100. The Slam specialties also don't expand out when it airs up, where these slightly do. So maybe at some point I'll make an adapter, because there's just not enough room with how everything's set up to oblong the holes or whatever. So we'll see what happens in the future, but for now I'm just going to mock it up with the airlift bags. So I'll start with that. So I got them snugged up so that way there's movement in it, just in case I need to move it back or forth. And then there's these bolts that go through this upper ear that ends up going through the upper shock mount right up here. So let me move some of this stuff around. So this is just like the one I built. This goes around the torsion tube down there. It looks like this goes on the outside of the body. Yeah. I wonder if I can slide this bolt through so the nut's on the outside, or if I should have the nut on the inside. Alright. Kind of a tight squeeze in here. Get the washer on. I'm gonna drop that. I'm gonna put this camera down. Be easier to put everything together with two hands than messing around. Where'd that washer go? What the heck? There it is. The instructions are pretty clear. Everything's in millimeters, so I had to get out the old ruler that had the centimeters on it. Alright, so I was able to tuck a wrench back there to hold the nut. And see what this camera's doing? Back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to snug this up, and then I'll put that loop on this lower bracket down here. Hopefully my arm's not in the way too much, but if it is, bear with me a little bit. So I'm just snugging this up, and I'm going to back it off a little bit so I can move the bracket around, and I'll go through and tighten everything up as I go. All right, I got the U-bolt down there snugged up. That bolt's snugged up. There's pretty much how that sits. And now I'll start working on the other side. I think I'll have a little bit more room to leave the camera set up and try to do this without knocking everything over. All these PTFE lines, I'm going to end up pulling all this out, and I bought new. I'm going to go through the pan. So I got a few other lines to run underneath the chassis. If I can get back to doing this. Not dropping that. Get that started. Alright, so I ended up having to take these all apart because I read the instructions again, and those bolts are supposed to go from the inside out. So disassembled it, put it back together. Fits about the same. It did look like the end of the threads were getting pretty close to the inside of that bracket there. So anyhow, just one of those days, I guess. Got all the bolts ready to go. Interesting. It's hitting the bottom of the package tray. Try flipping that around. If that makes a difference. Doesn't look like it is. Looks like my floor is all bent down, possibly. Well, let me get the old hammer out. Straighten that out. Just a second. Alright, so I cleared the package tray area. Good old hammer. I'll put this washer and nut on over here. Keep things from falling apart. tight squeeze. I'm going to loosen up some of the bolts. That's off a wee bit. That one looks like it's right where it needs to be. They're just lightly snugged. Nothing's really cranked down. I want to get everything kind of sitting into place where it needs to be before I tighten it up. The instructions did say it didn't matter if this bar was on the forward side or the back side. I put it on the forward side. We'll see how that fits with the transmission. And I'm sure you could put this together with the transmission still in the car. Be a pain in the ass on the ground with everything bolted together. Definitely have to have the engine out. Try snugging up the upper shock bolts. Alright, so that's everything all snugged up. Everything feels pretty solid. See if we got a little bit of gappage there. I don't really like that. See how the other side looks. Yeah, a little bit too. Now that had to drop down in order for this upper bolt to go in, so I think what I'll probably end up doing is I'll pull that upper bolt out, take a drill bit through there and open up that hole so this is not gapped out, so that way that can get tightened up where it needs to be. Who knows if that shock mount's bent or what, but hard to say. So, I'll put the down rods that come up here next, I guess, or maybe I should put the transmission in. Well, I'll hit pause and think about my next step, and then I'll put you back on here in a minute. Alright, so the transmission's in, temporarily of course. I don't see any clearance issues with the transmission right here. The only spot that I did see clearance issues that could possibly happen would be the axle hitting this upper bracket. And I'll push the axle up. Man. So that's touching right there. Let's see. We're almost to the stop. But I'll have to bolt one of my tires on and put a jack underneath this thing so I'm not struggling to see if it'll actually hit right here or if my tires will rub. I'm going to have to make a bump stop for this too because my tire's been rubbing. I've known that for a while. But anyways, the old system, it was the shocks that bottomed out, and that's what controlled my minimum ride height, but it's going to be changed around on this. I'm going to have to make some bump stops for it. But yeah, I'll bolt the wheel on and see if that even comes close first. But let's see if I can get down here. I'll have to push that up just a little bit, get it to line up where it needs to be. And then I'll throw a couple tacks on it. It's centered up in the transmission tunnel. So there we are, sitting at a 2-inch raise. This is what I had as an extension for that, what the hell is that thing called? A mid-mount, bolt-in mid-mount. So let me hit pause real quick and I'll grab a few pieces and go through what I'm going to make. So I haven't quite decided exactly how I'm going to be making the brackets, but my idea was I got this 1x2 square channel. Can't remember what wall thickness is, but if you really care, I'll do some measuring. But this is a tail shaft transmission mount for a like a turbo 350 or turbo 400 for Chevy. And anyways, I might have to make a bracket that comes off of one of these case bolts and goes back to the side cover studs to mount this up like this-ish, and then have that bar go across underneath it. So it's a different type of bolt-in mid-mount, I guess, and I'll have to weld brackets to it, of course, but that's an idea that I had, so I figure, you know what, I'll give it a shot. What the hell. But let me get back to it, and I'll bolt the lower bag brackets on. I'll bolt the shocks on, and we'll see how everything looks as far as with the 2-inch raise. I think that point, like I was saying, is going to be the only thing that's going to hit if it's all the way laid out, and you definitely don't want to be kinking this thin tube, thin wall tube in here. So let me get some bolts together and I'll bring you back on. Alright, next up is to install these brackets here. They sandwich the frame, and then there's a bar that'll go from here to here. Alright, there's both the down rods in. So that bracket looks. Alright, next step, lower bag mounts. So I reread the instructions and I put this down rod on like the instructions called for, and it only said to put one washer. Judging off the pictures, it was on the painted side, so that's what I went with. It also said to preload the upper rack 1.5 turns, so I did that. Man, this is annoying with this camera thing. I need to figure that out. This is too much. Anyhow, gonna bolt the lower bracket on now. The 2 bolts that go through the bag have to be installed first, and then the rest of them have to go on. There's a 40 mil that goes through here and 2 50 mil length bolts that go through here, and then the shock tower gets a 60 mil, or the lower shock mount gets a 60 mil bolt. almost forgot. The instructions, and it makes sense too. Come on, you son of a gun, get out of there. It says to put the bolts from the inside out. And that makes sense, so that way you don't hit the airbag with the threads coming off the bolt. And then this bracket goes on the outside of the axle housing. And back here takes 50 mil. Instructions said that right in the middle of the slotted holes is pretty much neutral, and then you can go forward or back to get your toe in and toe out. So I am putting it right in the middle. Then I'll have to do some measuring and see how far off it is. Man, this is a pain in the ass to get all this stuff to line up. You can definitely tell just from compressing the suspension that the top bag mount needs to be moved inboard because it was going up against the upper shock mount. What a pain in the ass this is going to be. Well, I'll mess with that when it actually is time to be bolting it together. There she is touching there, so I'll have to move this mount inboard. Well, let me grab a actually, you know what, I'll leave the shock off for now and let me go grab a tire. Try putting a tire on this and jack it up and see how close the axle tube gets to this upper bracket. Alright, I got a tire on. Try jacking this thing up. Seeing what it does. Hoping the tire's going to hit first. If not, we'll incorporate that into the bump stop. It's getting close. Right about there is maximum drop. The tire's up against the fender, and the axle tube is up against that bracket. So that's why he doesn't say that the 2-inch will work with this. There's actually a little sliver of light coming through right there. And I'll be making the bump stop to where I could actually have this thing down on its nuts like this without the tire rubbing. And it's tucked up in there for big old fatty. These are 215 65s in the rear. Gotta have some meat, you know what I mean? So that's awesome. Man, that spring is really close to the body on these calipers. Everything else, though, is looking great. So that's awesome. So I'll probably end up just putting a washer in between the axle and God, this camera's just annoying me. I gotta figure that setting out. Sorry, buddy. That's just annoying as hell. But anyways, I'll have to try sticking a washer in between the axle tube and this upper mount when I make my brackets for the bump stop. Not quite sure how I'm gonna make those yet, but I'll figure it out. Well, for shits and giggles, for show, might as well hook those shocks up and see how they look. I'm going to have to remake this brake line anyways, so might as well bend that out of my way. I'm going to mount these shocks up so the adjuster's on the bottom. This came with special bolts for the top, labeled separately even. I'll have to do some reading on these shocks to see exactly what I need to do to adjust them. Probably set them up loose and then tighten them as I go. Well, the shock does kind of sit cocked this way a little bit. There's no way, there's only a finger's width of distance here, there's no way this shock could go on the backside. That bolt's plenty long up here. Maybe I'll try putting some washers behind it to kick it out up top. Sure, somewhere close to there is going to be ride height. Not really in love with how the bag looks at ride height, but only time will tell. But overall, not too bad. A few spots that are a pain in the ass to tighten things up, but that's a quick little bolt up. It's probably going to be sitting a little bit lower than that for ride height. It's pretty much straight by eye. Be sitting a little bit lower than that. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. It's a pretty long one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead and leave your comments as you please. But yeah, let this thing test fit. We'll have to fit the other side up and then see how everything works in its range of motion. Anyways, thanks for watching, thanks for subbing. We'll catch you guys on the flip side.